Hello and welcome back. As Claire said, my name is Stella Ekibusi. I'm Head of Digital Education Futures and Deputy Director of the Eden Centre for Education Enhancement here at LSE. I'm delighted to chair our opening panel this morning on research on teaching and learning with generative AI. Our panel members are both colleagues from LSE, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcos Barreto, Assistant Professor in LSE's Department of Statistics, and Dr. John Cardoso Silva, Assistant Professor from LSE's Data Science Institute. Unfortunately, our planned third speaker, Dr. Sallai from the Department of Management, is unwell this morning and unable to join us. So depending on the discussion, we might finish a little earlier than planned, but we'll see. So I just wanted to outline very quickly how we're going to run this session. Marcos and John are going to give us a short overview of their work. Then I'll facilitate a bit of a panel discussion to delve a little deeper into the details, and then I'll open the floor for audience questions, and I'll make sure there's enough time for those at the end. So without further ado, let me hand over to Marcos to begin.
Thank you. I think I'm going to stand. It's easier. Okay, good morning everyone. So I'm Marcos Barreto from Statistics, and this is the, can I just put this up? Okay, thank you so much. And this is our talk about the Genial Rub for AI in education. And I'm just starting and hand over to Jonathan to present some of, a bit of the context, some use cases and some findings we have so far. And this presentation is on behalf of the Genial team. So Genial is, so it stands for Generative AI as a Catalyst for Learning. We started this project back in July 2023. So Jonathan and I, we were talking about AI. We noticed that some students were starting to use some AI. We observed some improvement in terms of code completion tools. And I think surprisingly, Grammarly was perhaps one of the most, and this is not a code completion tool, but we were observing something about Grammarly is getting better daily. And then we decided to put together these focus groups to try to understand how the students were using AI or start using AI, specifically on data science course, and more specifically on coding tasks. And then we run this from July to December. Then in January, we managed to turn this into a collaborative project. We brought more people, brought more colleagues from 4 departments, and we embraced, let's say, more tools and widen a little bit our scope. And now we are running Genial as a hub for capacity building, for designing, teaching, and learning resources. We got this funding from the Eden Centre since the beginning, and then LSE Data Science Institute as well. And now we have this funding from the British Academy. So this is the entire context. This is the team. I think some of the members will be joining later. What we did was basically, during the autumn term, we were focusing on data science course, mostly undergraduate courses. And then we managed to enroll 48 students across two departments and running, as I mentioned, databases, which is more computing based, and data science for social science, and data for data science, which is more general, this is more wide in terms of scope. Then we moved to the winter term and we brought more people, other students. We managed to enroll 106, more or less, students. So it's kind of 200 students in total. As you can see, we cover very specialized courses such as deep learning, which was very interesting because generative AI or generative models is part of the deep learning content. So we were using generative AI to teach students about generative AI, so something more or less like this. And we were very interested to see how the students would be using this as a kind of a tool to understand the tool as a tool and the tool as the content being taught. And then we brought some qualitative course as well. So this is from the management department. We try to understand see the same problems see other point of view in terms of more qualitative aspects. So this was entirely data or courses participating in the study. We moved from, during the autumn term, we try to have this mixed use of AI. So we agree and using AI in some selected weeks, and then we split the students, and so there was an opt-in survey. So we invite students to explicitly say, I want to be part of Genial, and I want to participate in Genial. And then these students were supposed to send some chat logs for us. So during some select seminars, we split the classes in, between those using AI, those not using AI, and we try to compare in terms of performance, engagement, and outputs in a series of metrics. Then we realized in the winter term that we had to expand these, and then we just asked the students, okay, keep going with AI. You can use AI freely, but you should keep this running log, and you should try to record all your interactions across all your learning and teaching activities. Then we try to run something like until week 5, we provide no tips about AI, we just run our courses as normal. And then we run this open lecture during week 6, and we discuss about AI, how to use AI, some dangers, some benefits, and then from week 7 we start to provide some guidance. And this was mostly based on prompt engineering and some other select examples. And as we did in the previous term, we collect chat logs, and then we run some focus groups, and then we talk to students, and it's very small focus groups. We have a few guiding questions, and then we try to understand interactions about AI. So this was the entire experiment. We managed to publish a paper discussing some of these findings and discussing Genial between July 2023 and then last year. And I just picked some of the findings we have in the paper. Of course, we know there is this dilemma between the student needs to produce some final products to just match the marking criteria, get rid of any assignments. So we know we have this on one side, but on the other side, we have some students really trying to engage with the tool and learning more and more and using this tool as a kind of a co-pilot, because this is pretty much about coding. So we observe this kind of dilemma. We discuss this in the paper. We discuss some other findings as well. We look into the management, specifically in the management scenario, because again, this is qualitative courses, and then we try to understand how these students were using AI as well. And we could observe this kind of a more, less beneficial compared to those taking quantitative courses. And this is perhaps because the nature of the assignments and the nature of the activities being used on these courses. And then we also observe this tendency to rely on AI when you have a bunch of readings, when you have more complex tasks, and then you try to speed up your productivity or simply try to get rid of deadlines. We need to produce some stuff. So this was pretty much the overall context. We picked some testimonials just to give some insights. The first one is about this idea, okay, I'm using ChatGPT and I know what I'm doing, and then also I realize what I'm doing, I can just ask the tool to do all this meaningless work for me. And by meaningless, we can understand this is perhaps automation, this is perhaps something that the student does not need to think so much, because I know the output, I trust the tool, and it's pretty much about automating, pretty much speeding up some more boring tasks. So this can be perhaps the understanding behind this meaningless. Then we have the middle bullet point, which is about, okay, I need to get rid of my assignment, so I just produce something, I send this as my summative, and now I can relax, sit down, and try to understand what I just submit as my formative or summative. And of course, we should know, okay, this is another situation. And then we got the third bullet point, which is a very good one, because we were talking about the students, and then some students told, okay, if your question is not able to differentiate between me and AI, you must think about your question, and you must think your question. And this, of course, is a kind of a punch in the face. Okay, you need to figure out how you deal with AI. So if you look to the paper, we have a few more testimonials, and we'll discuss a bit more in terms of all these elements, okay? Moving to some case studies, and then I will hand over to Jonathan to present it. So this is databases. This is a second year undergraduate course. And last year we had 85 students, and this is pretty much the summative assessment. So we have these two individual assignments. The first one was about relational database, some e-commerce database. The students need to design database modeling, some SQL programming. And then the second assignment is about document database and graph database. And then there's a course project, group project. The students can propose any topic, which is approved by the course teachers, and then they have 1 month to deploy this. So this is the overall idea. The course has this full authorized use policy. So LSE has 3 options into the AI policy, and we take this full authorized use. But the students need to submit chat logs and discuss how they use AI in the report, okay? And we expect some good discussion about any usage of AI. And you can see about, as you can see about the AI usage, we expect more use in terms of the first assignment because the students are still getting to know about databases and still understanding some basic steps. There is one step which is database modeling, which is not so straightforward for some students because you need to figure out how you model some external world into some sort of database modeling. We allow the students to use this for data generation, which is a very good exercise. Then in the second assignment, we see less students were using AI, and partially because one of the elements in the second assignment was dependent on the first assignment, which is pretty much about, okay, now you need to transpose your e-commerce relational database into a graph database in Neo4j. And the students, see, they managed to know, okay, how to do this one. So I don't need so much AI to do this one, because pretty much transposing SQL code from one language into another language. And when you go to the group project, so we expect a few more use, because this is a group project, I think there's more people involved, it's a more complex task, and I think someone in the group will want to use AI, and then all the group must agree in using AI. And you see half of the groups have used AI. All sorts of use, if you look into the chat logs, it's pretty much about some basic data manipulation until something very complex in terms of APIs and dealing with coding and data, etc., etc. So this is for the whole context. And then I picked some chat logs and some statements, just perhaps to raise some discussion questions. I don't know if it's easier to read, but anyway. The first one is about, okay, I have used ChatGPT only if I couldn't find any solution online. And then when you look into this, you say, okay, this means that any online source is reliable and we can just allow the students to use any online source, but when it comes to generative AI, we need to ask the students to acknowledge the use of AI. But you're free to use any other online sources. And the students were using, well before generative AI, we were using Reddit, Stack Overflow, or any other online community and finding code online and just bringing this code as part of their submission. And we were so much concern about this, where this code comes from. But when it comes from AI, we say, oh, now you need to acknowledge the use of AI. So this is one thing, perhaps, in terms of which sources are reliable, which ones we need to account for. Then we have the middle one, is about, okay, I have used AI for projects, specific tasks. It's a very short statement, and then the students is just saying, okay, I have used AI. And this makes you think about, okay, what if I am, so myself as an educator, I need to do the same statement as well, and I need to acknowledge whether I'm using AI to produce course materials. So this is perhaps about the level of disclosure we should ask the students in terms of using AI. So you have used AI for what specific tasks inside your semester or inside your work. Okay? Then we have the third one is about when the students say, okay, I have used AI because I have a very limited experience in Python. And then we see, okay, perhaps generative AI is helping these students to learn Python. But now we got this, but I also managed to do this diagnosis queries. And you say, okay, this is very interesting because it seems that the student is using AI to try to discover some errors or improve the summative work, and we try to understand what this means. We can understand by diagnostic queries, because this supposes some sort of understanding, and then the students just using AI to try to improve a little bit. Then we have two examples. Let me just go to this one. So the middle one is about, okay, the student has some code and then is asking the tool to refactor this code and then produce something like an automation pipeline. Oh, this is my structure and I want you to produce the same structure but just replacing some specific elements. So this can be one understanding, provided the student has managed to find this one. If you look into the top right, so the student has provided some graph mapping, and then can you just write all the boring creation code for me, because this is pretty much automation. Okay? So these perhaps are two examples of the use that we think students will be doing, and this be very, very good for the students. Then we get two specific testimonials. So the first one on the top is pretty much about, I didn't want to push the tool too hard. And then you look into this, okay, what the student means by pushing the tool? This means the student know all the capabilities the tool is able to, this tool has, and the student is pretty much saying, okay, I'm very happy with the outputs, I don't want to go further, and I don't want to push the tool to give me more insights. So it's a kind of a very, very good question. And then I got this email down below, it's very much about, okay, I want to check whether using AI is overstepping boundaries. And when I got this question, I say, okay, what is mean by boundaries? What I can understand by boundaries? And then how can I say to students you are overstepping boundaries if I have no clear idea of what would be my boundary here? And this is the big data course, this is not database, this is postgraduate courses. Students play with more complex APIs. And then my answer was basically, okay, this really depends on what you understand by boundaries. But make sure you understand the code, make sure you can explain the code, make sure you know what your code is doing, and perhaps you'll have a very narrow boundary, and then you check whether AI can help you or not. So this is a kind of a summary of outputs. And then my last one. So in this course, we are applying some tools. Of course, for code generation debugging, we got chat logs with different tools, and some students try to use different tools to get the same code and then try to compare whether one code is better than another, and of course pick the best one. So there's a bunch of different tools providing code for students. We have been experimenting with interactive podcasts, so trying to summarize some course contents. And this database course is part of the Parker project. And this is pretty much an agent framework plus a knowledge base. So this is not my work, this is Afan's and Zain's work. I think they are there. So they took the course with me and then they approached me and say, oh, we are designing this tool and we want to onboard all the contents from the database course inside this tool. And they are doing a very good job because this is a very good knowledge base tailored to the course content, so you can just make sure all the content inside Parker is matching your learning outcomes, so it's a very, very good mapping. There are some functionalities for you to check about student engagement, so how the student is engaged with the content. And there is a very helpful function which is pretty much about anytime the chatbot does not have the answer, this can be just escalate this question to you, and you as a teacher can jump in and say, oh, let me provide a few more details for you. So it's a very good way. So we are designing this, and the idea is to be operational for the next academic year, so all the students will be able to use it. And I think it's fine. I'm going to just hand it over to Jonathan to finish.
Do a weird hand over here. Thanks, Marcus. So I'm John from the Data Science Institute. So complementing what Marcus just said, I wanted to show you some other examples, and perhaps I hope we made it clear that what we're doing in our study is more than looking at how our students scored. We're not that concerned into how they scored in their final grades and how much they got in their final grades. We're actually concerned about how exactly do they go about doing a task, and what are the thought process behind that task, and where does AI go? So that's why we're going deep into course material. I brought some examples from one of the courses I teach. So this is DS 105. There's lots of coding. It's data for data science. It's focused on how to collect, manipulate, and transform data. And I have a similar methodology as Marcus, so we have a very similar pedagogical approach where we have several smaller pieces of coursework throughout the course. We don't have a big one. So I think that allows us to pick up early interventions early on and things like that in the course. So this was during Genio. And the example I brought to you is very illustrative of the kind of patterns I saw we see throughout the data we collected during the study. I'm going to call we have two students, a student A and student B. Student A is an example of a student who did not have prior experience with Python. They were not that confident with programming in Python. Whereas student B already had some prior experience, so they already had some prior knowledge of the tools that we're going to use in the course perhaps. So that means they were already predisposed to be more confident in their coding skills already, right? And then take a look at what happened. So one other thing to say about student A is that when we see in the chat logs, student A used ChatGPT mostly to help with the assessment straight away. So I need to get this done, do this for me. Whereas student B, we saw them interacting with the tool in kind of like a Socratic dialogue that we like to see, but the student was the one guiding that discussion, right? So that's what I'm gonna show you. One interesting thing about this course is that not only I have the chat logs, but I also have their Git logs. So I can see, like, if you're not familiar with coding and this kind of tools, these are like the versions of every single piece of assessment they were doing. So I don't see just the final product, I see how they were building up the process of their assessment over a couple of weeks of the course. So I could see, for example, in student A, all of their edits were with the same message. Setting up my assessment, and then it continued until the end. So as if for like every time you say, I completed a bit of part of this here, instead of reflecting on the task, they were just saying, I just have to do this. Okay, so that's how I read this. Student B, on the other hand, even their messages on like how they evolve their project is a little bit more contextual. So they tell us that I just completed task 1, and then another one is like finished task 2, and I have precise timestamps on all of those things. So I know exactly what they were doing. I can look at their chat logs and I see exactly what they were chatting with ChatGPT just a minute before they submitted that and recorded, like put a record of the evolution of their projects. So I bring that up because that builds a bigger picture of how a student is learning. This is student B's interaction with ChatGPT as recorded in their chat logs. The hashed areas here are places where we had assignments. So I start here, like I release an assignment here, and the deadline of the assignment was over there. So I hope you can see that there's a big spike. As soon as an assignment starts, like I need to interact with AI a lot more now that I have an assignment to think about. We see this in all of the chat logs that we observe. So it's very common for our students to interact with AI a lot more when there's a big deadline coming or there's something interesting graded that they need to submit. So the student was interacting with AI. This here, for example, these are the days, Thursdays was when I had my lectures. So during the days of the lectures, there was some interaction during the day. And this, when I look at those, it's just like clarification of things I was just explaining in class. Or pushing the boundaries a little bit and seeing, oh, what if, like there was a lot of what if questions in there that were very interesting. So very good use of AI. But I want to bring you closer to one of those peaks of student B, for example. So I had a student who, so the student B, who was very resourceful, was able to notice when AI was overcomplicating stuff. And AI still overcomplicates code. We have very fancy AI coding generators, but to this day, the AIs we have still overcomplicate stuff. So the student would do like, okay, how do I get that code to output the title of the page? They were doing a web scraping task. They had to go write Python code to go to a page, collect some information from there. Here, like I didn't put the whole thing because AI spit out a whole lot of code, but it was very complicated, very complicated. The student did, that was like, 2 minutes later, the student said, well, I tested this, and it worked where your stuff didn't. And this here, I was like very happy to see that because this is what I taught in the course. So like, the student was looking at the course material, picking stuff from my course material and seeing this single line of thing here works, whereas your huge hundreds of lines did not. So the AI was like, oh yeah, sure, of course, I didn't know you knew that. And so on. So this is, for me, is a very good use of AI because the student is being resourceful and they are the one in control of their learning journey, right? So they are the ones that dictate how the AI should behave for them, should work for them. Whereas student A did something that was, I generally don't think that this kind of code would exist without AI ever. Because if you know a bit of coding, you understand that the whole point of web scraping is you let Python, the programming tool, do the scraping for you. What the student did was, in previous iterations, with simpler code, AI gave them a simpler code and they ran, it worked, great. That builds confidence. That's how I read their chat logs. This builds confidence. It works. In previous simpler assignments, it works. With this one, the student got a bit more confused about how to do the actual web scraping. So AI does something that Stack Overflow does a lot, like this forums online, which is, well, to do this thing you're asking, here's a bit of an example with fake data. And then here's the code you would use to extract this fake data just as a demonstration for you. So hopefully you can adapt to your own code. The student took to mean that the fake data was the thing she should do, right? So that's the thing that you should do. So in the end, the student ended up producing fake data with the AI. So this first line here is what they should be capturing automatically with the AI. They should never be putting that here like that, spelled out. And then they proceeded to do that several times. And you also, if you know coding, you should know that all this code could be written in 2 lines only. You don't need all of that. This is a lot of repetition that is unnecessary. So this reflects a lack of learning, a lack of engagement with the actual learning process that is there. And this is very typical of how the 2 discrepancies in use of AI that I observe in my data for that particular course. So there were, students skipped some important steps that we wanted them to go through, and if they don't get this now, later on they will struggle with more complex code. We're now mapping all of these things that we're seeing to this, and this comes from the literature. I have links later on for this. Young et al., they classify the different kinds of interactions our students have with AI into these 4 categories. Resistive, they don't want to use AI. That's what we see sometimes in the Department of Management logs, that they didn't even trust us to read their chat logs. So they didn't even share. If there was AI, we wouldn't know. Receptive is student A's example. So everything the AI gives me, I trust, therefore it's right. Resourceful is what we call the student B. So they are in control, they know what they're doing, they use AI to augment their capabilities, and they're doing great. Reflective is more the people who are questioning the why of what they're doing. So why am I doing this? What is the point in all of this? And we're thinking there might be another category, which is riffing with AI. This was some conversation we had with Sal Khan when he was here last year at LSE, and then he has this idea. He had a YouTube video with his son, everything, when you're riffing with AI to get some new ideas and brainstorm new forms of thinking. So we think we have some evidence of that in our logs as well. A couple of other things to conclude my speech. This is no longer working. Can you just move to the next? There you go. One quick thing here. So this is not from my course, this is from my colleague Casey Kearney from Public Policy. Master students copy and pasting the entire questions of the assignments that he was giving them, and literally 1 minute later pasting the next question, and 1 minute later pasting the next question, and never again touches the AI. So we wonder what happened there. This is my actual final thing I wanted to mention is that I think I built a good structure of assignment that is AI resilient, because I did this with my colleague Yang from the Eden Center here at LSE. And this is the process of mapping everything we think our student will go through as they produce their final product. Instead of focusing just on looking at the final product, I want to be able to look at the final product and to be able to perceive that they went through all of these processes. This, for me, is the key for a future of education with an AI-assisted learning. So focus on what exactly do we want the students to learn. Do we want just for them to mimic something we said in class later on? Or do we want them to go and engage and maybe get caught up in some loops, intentional loops, in there? So this, I think, is the key for some of that. And these are some of the literatures that we're engaged with that popped up some of their names throughout this presentation. And we'll be publishing some of those insights in a more compiled way and soon. I won't promise anything. So that, I think, concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus and John, and also welcome to our colleagues who are joining us on Zoom. As I said, I'm going to just facilitate a short panel discussion between our speakers, and then I'll open the floor for questions. And colleagues online, please post your questions in the chat.
Q&A.
In the Q&A, and Michaela and Chris will pass them to me. Okay, so as part of the Genial project, you explored how students use Gen AI in their learning. What were the biggest learnings for you both from the project, from the different disciplinary areas that you teach?
I can go first. Yeah. Okay. So, especially in terms of disciplinary boundaries, some of the findings are for me, like what I said, like some students are completely receptive, some students are completely resourceful, and we need to come up with pedagogical tools to make sure that all students are making resourceful use of AI and not receptive use of AI. So for me, that's the major thing. Another key takeaway for me, there are many others, but is the how discipline changes how students especially engage with AI or communicate their use of AI. So that was the case for the Department of Management, where we got very little chat logs from them, and we know that they were all using AI. Like in the open lecture that we had during the study, there were a lot of management students there, and they were like, "I just don't trust you. I don't trust you with my chat log." Or sometimes this is the kind of barrier that we didn't see so much in the more quantitative disciplines. So there's some disciplinary boundaries over there.
Yeah, perhaps I can just add 2 points. So, and this is especially from the database course. So one takeaway is I noticed that most students were a bit hesitant to use AI. And it's basically because they want to ensure they were learning the basic skills. So I won't be trusting AI, I won't be using AI, because I don't want to use any other tools. It's not only AI, but I don't want to go to Stack Overflow, and so I want to do this by myself. So this is perhaps one takeaway. The second is, I think more than ever, I think it's for us as educators, I think it's very important to try to have this kind of individual, I think it's pretty much this framework that Jonathan just mentioned, to make sure we can follow each student through the learning journey. I think it's not easy because we have, in my case, it's 85 students, but I think more than ever we need to have this kind of individual contact with the students and make sure they are learning all the basic steps.
Maybe AI can help with that.
And then maybe AI can help with that, because we can just ask the student to go to this framework and to take some logs and see.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any changes in the way your students have used generative AI this year compared with last year?
I noticed a big difference this term especially. So one of the things that we said in our paper was, one of our recommendations was, when you're introducing completely new topics, try to delay the introduction of AI a little bit so that the foundations are solid in students' minds, and then you can include AI. I find that now kind of pointless, because I had the same course that I was presenting here at the start of this term in January. There were less conversations in the classroom, there were less engagement with each other, there were less engagement with myself in the classroom to a level that I hadn't seen before. And that's because everyone was talking through their ChatGPTs all the time during class. So they were interacting, engaging with all of that. I saw that a lot more. And despite that conversation, like, let's try this exercise, I do a lot of active learning, it was pointless. So then you have to kind of think, how do I approach AI from the first day I'm teaching, even though I'm teaching a completely new concept, there's no way to ignore that. So I see a huge difference there. In the end, they warmed up and they were not chatting to each other. They're now back to being humans. But I noticed a big difference in behavior there.
I can comment because I moved from undergraduate to postgraduate course because I have database and then big data. It's pretty much the same problem. So if you teach big database and big data, at the end of the day you are dealing with data, but using different APIs and different amount of data. But I can see from the students is basically, so in both cases they try to see a delay as much as possible in use of AI because they want to learn the basic skills. But then, depending on the context, they need to use AI for more kind of dealing with the data, preparing data. I think it's more, it's more on the coding side. I can perhaps elaborate this a bit more later, but it's not the program process itself. So, but it's based on the code. It's basically on the automation steps because they do not want to waste time doing some automation steps. I think this is perhaps the most noticeable behavior we have for the students. And when you look into the chat logs and you ask the students to discuss about the use of AI, so most students are able to elaborate very well in terms of, okay, I have used AI to help me with this and that. It's a very clear discussion in terms of whether AI is being used or not, and which proposed things or not. I think it's
great. So you might have touched on this a little bit, John, just now, but what strategies have you found useful in addressing concerns about kind of misuse or over-reliance on generative AI from students?
So I think the answer I have right now is kind of frustrating, which is to increase your workload and to actually because I haven't found a better way of doing that. So for me, the best way to approach that, and that's something that we both kind of do in our pedagogies, is we have a lot of continuous assessment. And because we have a lot of continuous assessment, we have a lot of problem-based or project-based learning, you can spot more easily if the student is going through a reasoning that is misguided, and then you pick up that early on. So I noticed from my students this year, even though they were like very reluctant to engage with the actual course material, they liked having the AI guide them through the process. After like first feedback and 3 weeks into the course, I saw a huge improvement in quality of what they were producing by week 5, and now by week 8 of the course, I could see they were thinking about the problem once again. So I think having that monitoring in a way, and that constant feedback loop, for me right now is what I feel works best. But then you can see the implications for workload they're massive, right? So we have to figure out a better way to scale that up. But for me, that's the answer I have at the moment.
In my case, I like to show the students whether the code doesn't work. So it's basically, usually I don't use AI so much as teaching, so I try to delay as much as possible because I want to show the students understand the process behind any coding skills. As I was saying, I think that is the skills we need to ensure the students is the programming skills. So you have some problem and then you know your problem you're trying to solve. You have a very clear research questions or any questions. And then you go to all this entire pipeline. I need some data. I need to make sure the data is compatible with the problem I'm addressing. And then you do all the data preparation steps. You have some modeling, and then you figure out how to present and visualize the outputs. So this is for me the programming skill. And this is the one we need to ensure. And then coding is just one way you can materialize this programming skill, because you can just pick some pen and paper and say, oh, this is my solution for this problem. Okay? So what I do when I'm teaching database and then big data is pretty much about any piece of code. I go to the piece of code and say, oh, this is what this code is doing. And I try to make sure the students know what the code is doing. And also the students know what the code is for. So now you can go to AI and you can ask AI to generate some similar code to you. But because you should be able to understand the code. And you should be able to explain and assess whether the code is useful or not. So this is a kind of, and then you show, okay, this is not working. So in database, the students were able to use AI to generate some fake data to populate some database. And this was a complete nightmare because you go to something Python, some other tool, and you get a bunch of it's poor data quality data, poor quality data, because this is a relational database. You need something like, let's say you have a customer table and then you have some orders, you have some products, and you need to make sure that the customers match with the products and the orders. It's a kind of a relational stuff. And if you ask the tool to generate some fake data, you get a bunch of random data. So there is no way you can link one table with another table. And then the students spend a lot of time trying to glue everything together. And you say, the key for you to do this one is pretty much about improving your prompts. You should tell the tool, okay, you need to make sure this table will be matching with this another table. But it's a good data engineering skill. It's automation again, but it's based on a very precise prompt to make sure all the constraints are in place.
Can I just compliment that very quickly? So, even though we're talking about programming and coding, I think we both share that opinion that this goes beyond coding. Like coding is perhaps, I think Maria mentioned that yesterday as well, that coding is one of the areas where we're seeing most automation at the moment. That's perhaps like software engineering is one of the areas where we'll see most automation quicker than most other areas. But I think the process and the principles work the same for an essay-based assignment or something like that. So because what do we want our students to do when coding? We want them to think like a coder. We want them to think like a machine would think, and then how do I operationalize this? It doesn't matter that much. It matters more that they are thinking the right thoughts and then eventually making the product appear. So if you think about it in terms of like when writing a reflection piece, when writing a case study analysis or something like that, what you care about is not, as an educator I hope, it's not the letters and the things that you see in the end, but that the student went through a process of thinking, engaged with the literature, thought about that, and then whether they use AI or not to produce the final product, it doesn't matter. So I think there are lots of parallels in there in the programming world to education in general.
Okay, thank you. I want to open the floor now. We've got about 15 minutes left. Do we have any questions from the room or anyone? Okay, let's start.
Thank you, Martin Compton, King's College. I want to follow up on what you just said about the transferability of this whole idea to the humanities, social sciences, essay writing, all of that kind of stuff, and the issue that you also identified about scalability of this, because I see so many parallels in the kind of advice that I'm giving to my colleagues about, let's look more at the process of producing a written piece of work, let's look more at the way in which you can iterate, but also let's be more open to support of new technologies and tools. So what advice would you give to your colleagues in the humanities, in the social sciences, who might want to apply the same techniques, the lessons you've learned, the pitfalls, but when it comes to writing rather than coding?
Yeah, so I would still, to my mind at the moment, the best thing I see is actually mapping the process again. So I would say, if I want my student to write a piece, at the end they should be able to write something that has an introduction, engages with the right literature, and then makes a conclusion. And then reverse engineer that process. How do I think they would get there? Well, maybe to get to that point, they would have written some loose bullet points, or they made a mind map, or they made some other something. And then how do I ensure they connect the dots? Is there something in my practice that I help them connect the dots? This should guide you working backwards into, now maybe I don't teach them how to actually write a piece in this particular format, rigid format that has an introduction, Instead, I would say, maybe I need to help them. The AI can do that for them. Now I can probably focus on how do you actually establish meaningful connections between literature? How do I make sure that I'm making an argument that is well supported by evidence, that is well supported by factuality? So if you think about what do I want in the final product, and then you start mapping out the process, and ideally we'll do something like with the diagram that I showed, and then you have like, if the student was coming to my classes and was listening to everything, they would ideally follow this process. What we did, we didn't have the time to show, but we annotated some parts where this might not be very AI resilient. So where there's a problem that maybe this is not AI resilient and we need a human there to make that action, then you inject other techniques for that. So in short, is working backwards into and rethinking very deeply, what really do I want out of an essay for my students? Do I just want a piece of work there? Or do I want actually evidence that there had been some thought behind that? Mapping the process, not a product. And I don't think that's an AI problem. AI just brought that to the surface. That was a problem all along. Like, our assessment tools are not that great. So yeah, that's what I do. I don't know how to fix the workload problem. So
Can I just compliment this? I think it's a very good question. Just making this parallel, because writing is not exactly coding, vice versa, although they share some characteristics. But it's the key, if you want to improve your coding skills, if you want to improve your programming skills, it's not about the code itself. It's about mapping how the data flows across your code. And this is perhaps the same as mapping the final product. Mapping the process, not the final product. See, if you want to improve your code skills, you need to make sure you know how the data is flowing from one piece of software to another, and this will avoid most of your coding and programming skills. And if you try to start coding from the very beginning, I need to do this piece of software and then I need to move to this one, and you start getting errors, you won't be progressing much. But if you try to, let's abstract all the idea and do some mind mapping or some data flow process, this will be better. So I think this matters in process for essay.
For coding.
Yeah, this one here.
Thank you very much, John Payne from New Zealand. Since we're talking about research on using artificial intelligence, generative AI in teaching and learning, so I'm wondering if it's possible that I can throw a thorny question about research ethics. You know, for a lot of the existing research in this particular space, they are like the teachers surveying or investigating their own students in the course they're teaching. So usually for this kind of research, it's not allowed. But I think this is a particular time that we really needed to understand how students learn in this space. So do you think in, for example, LSE or some other universities, we might have some kind of green light for researchers to get started in this kind of research? Because for us, we have to go through a long process. You probably know how painful it is. And then, half a year later, you got the approval, and then you're no longer teaching the course. So I've got a lot of invitations since I'm running an AI lab from PhD students wanting to come over to my courses to collect data. So they primarily seeing this area of, doing research in this area is mainly about collecting data instead of understanding the learning process or transformation in learning. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, particularly you were thinking about publishing your research. Thank you so much.
So it's a very good question. I think we were very lucky because at the very beginning we had support, from Indian Center, from our departments, to run this project. And then we asked students to explicitly opt in to participate in the project. So this was the first term. In the second term, we did the opposite. So everyone is participating. If you want to opt out, you need to tell us. But the thing is, when we tell the students, if you are using AI, you should submit your chat logs, and then we'll be using your chat logs as part of your assessment, of course, but also to understand your learning process. And there is no way for the students to say, I want you to use my chat log to understand my learning process, because this is part of your assessment. And this, I think you mentioned before, for me, marking today is the most complicated stuff, because it takes so long, because you need to look into code and chat logs, the reports, and try to understand how the student is learning, and which piece of software the student managed to do, and which piece of software the AI is doing. So we were looking in terms of getting access to chat logs and partnering with the students. I think someone mentioned yesterday about this student and staff partnership. I think it was due to appreciate. And we try to do this since the beginning of the project and bring the students to work with us and see, we'll be building this collective understanding about the learning process together and see how we can best help you.
So I think another thing that we're looking at is that our ethics approval was very quick to be processed. So I think to the core of your question is that the universities need to understand that we need more research into educational psychology of what's going on when we have an AI assistant as part of the learning process, right? There's another entity in the classroom. So if we understand that there's that, and then this is an urgent question, so to speak, because like most of our research is focused on attitudes towards AI, less so the nitty-gritty of how exactly and which points. So if there's a better understanding from people who are making the decisions about what research really matters and that kind of stuff, then maybe that's the way forward. As if we are not the decision makers, I don't know what else we can do. We can, I think we can advocate for that perhaps, and then we can join forces in different institutions perhaps, like doing collaborations where we could partner and do that.
Great, thank you, and thanks. Great question. One up there in the corner.
Hello, great talk. Thank you very much. My name is David Lefebvre. I'm from Imperial College, and my question is around the separation of AI and non-AI work. So I think it's standard practice across HE at the moment to ask students to separate their AI work from their non-AI work. But when I think about the profession of programming these days, the use of AI is so entwined.
There's no separation.
It's impossible to separate. Students, professional programmers program through AI, and especially recently with the emergence of very sophisticated agentic systems, if you want to prepare students for the workplace, you have to train them in the use of these AI tools. And I'm wondering how you're planning to revise the curriculum and your assessments in light of this. I know you touched on this already, but you could expand it a bit.
So I've done some thinking on that. So I actually don't think it's useful or is worthy of our time to separate that. So I don't think it's relevant to say, was this line written by AI, was this line written by human? I think it's pointless. AI is writing everything. But I think one thing that I included now in my marking criteria is intentionality. Do I see evidence of intentionality behind what you're doing? So for coding, because I know that domain, I can see and I understand how AI-generated code for my discipline tends to look like. I can see when the way they write suggests intentionality. So that's what and then I interacting with my students a lot is saying, make sure it's clear to us what your intentions behind a piece of code was, or behind a piece of writing was. Make your intentions clearer, and this seems to solve a little bit of the problem. I don't think it will solve that well in the future. I don't think it lasts for a long time, because like the models are getting more fancier and more interesting, and there's like the reasoning models that might generate some of those justifications for us, and then where's the human? But I still think, but to your core of your question, I don't think it's relevant to distinguish. This was generated by an AI, this was generated by a person. We just need to figure out new mechanisms to see where was the human intention behind that piece of code, behind that piece of analysis. Or, I think that's the part. Like, how exactly? I don't know, but that's how I think.
I just wonder, John, if you might address the second part of the question. Sorry, not John, Marcus. The second part of the question around preparing students for a world where AI is.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I totally agree with you. So well before generative AI, we were facing no-code data science. We had this bunch of tools when you just see drag and drop and you build the entire pipeline with a few lines of code. So generative AI is not new in terms of automating stuff. And I agree with John. I think there is no way for us to separate. And my understanding is about the process again. Is the overall programming skills. And I do agree with you in terms of agentic frameworks. I think this is the way we will be coding and programming in C from now. I don't know for how long.
I'm already doing that.
Yeah, but this is the way we build software today. And this is pretty much about orchestrating different tools, speeding up some parts, automating other parts, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure you understand the whole pipeline, and you know how the data is coming in, which data is coming out, and all the process you need to be in the middle. I think this is and so it's a very good way. And another thing I think is basically, we are likely to have a few more data scientists across all disciplines, because now it's way more accessible to everyone to play with these tools. And then, of course, we still have software engineers and data scientists, but this is likely to be widen scope for everyone to play with these tools. So I think we need urgently to bring this into the curriculum and see.
Very quick one line on that as well is that training students to be more intentional about what they're doing engages them with the analytical thinking that is thought of as the new best skill that we can have, regardless of discipline and whatever. So if we embed that somehow into our disciplines, Then there's a way that we're training them for the future where they're working with AI and they're engaging with the right thinking framework. I think.
Can we have one final question? Jamie in the middle.
Hi, my name's Jamie, and I joined the Digital Skills Lab here at LSE this week. Thank you both. I really enjoyed the talk there. And I've got many questions, but so just to pick one, considering that student A who you spoke about, who was using the tool in not the most purposeful way, maybe a hypothetical question: how likely do you think they would be to have been maybe cheating or copying other students' work if we went back a few years in time? So I guess I'm wondering, are these Gen AI tools encouraging students to do this type of behaviour, or really are they just illustrating patterns and behaviours that were already existed beforehand?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. So the student A was someone who, by the way, I didn't tell the full story, but student A, after this, when they got the feedback and like, everything here's wrong, they did amazingly well on the next one they did, because then they were intentional about their coding. They were lacking some foundations, perhaps in fault sometimes of the curriculum that I had designed for them, didn't prepare them enough to get the right skills in programming. So a little bit is like lack of understanding. And if AI was not in the picture, I don't think they would copy from others. I think they would submit something very incomplete. They would just give me something that there's nothing, pretty much nothing there, instead of generating a lot of code, a lot of code that does nothing. So there's that element, but I think looking at the chat logs, there's a very clear argument, very clear path where they trusted the AI, and the AI gave them, because I could see like from previous days, the AI gave them good code. When I boosted up the complexity level, like now things are more complicated. Oh, that was good yesterday, so that should work. This is extremely clear in the chat log. So I think the AI gave them the confidence that this is right. So, and I think that's the problem with everything else, like with the Microsoft research showing, Carnegie Mellon showing that maybe we're lacking our critical thinking, and I think this is because of that. So AI gives you the aura that this is correct. So therefore, it worked in the past, it should work in other things that I don't understand. So I think it's a little bit of both, but there's a lot more AI suggestions than there are like lack of ability.
Final word?
We have time?
Just
Not really, but I'll give you
Not really.
Not really.
Just fine.
I think we have several ways to cheat in terms of coding. See, this is why we have these cheat sheets, because you can just see that. But I think at the end of the day, if you are going to coding and you go to this industry, your code must pass any compliance test, and must be well documented, and need to see be adherent with procedures and all this stuff. Which means you need to have this skill. You need to be able to write your code. You need to be able to explain your code. There's a huge emphasis on documentation as well. I think it's not working. Okay. And this is this is why I think this is the right skill.
Okay, thank you so much.